moderately poor, and also undernourished. Despite rapid urbanization, large or increasing rural populations will be a reality for most of low and middle income countries for the foreseeable future, and that's also true for Asia Pacific. Meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 1, poverty, and SDG 2, hunger, and the longer-term agenda of leaving no one behind will require properly addressing linkages between rural people's well-being and food system. When we link between rural people well-being and food system, definitely nutritious food, adequate provision of nutrition food is very important. Recalling Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 2, which calls to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Target to devote specific attention to increase investment, including through enhanced international cooperation in rural infrastructure, agricultural research and extension services, technology development, and plant and livestock gene banks in order to enhance agricultural productive capacity in developing countries, in particular less developed countries. It is also important to consider that millions of people are food insecure and malnourished in all its forms. The aforementioned drivers and high levels of inequality inter alia driving up the cost of nutritious foods in the realms of food production, food supply chains, and food environments, as well as consumer demand and the political economy of food are behind this significant deficiency in our food system. So, I mean, there are policies at the national level, at the regional level, and at the global level. This we call in economics like macro policies to, I mean, kind of like bring better situation and to bring improvement in this food insecurity and also nutrition sensitivity case in lower middle income countries. But most of the policies are, as I said, at the aggregate level or at the national level, at the regional level. Sometimes there are good policies at the regional level or at the country level, even at the center, the state government level. But policies fail sometimes because they are not sensitive to those who are like at the micro level, who are receiver of the policies, who are supposed to respond to those policies. And that's why nowadays, like when we are looking for like evidence-based policy, we want to see whether these evidence are coming from. So this paper today, it is kind of focusing to the micro level, and it will, I mean, kind of like find out some of the challenges at the micro level when we talk about like nutrition policies. I welcome Ruchira Bhattacharya of NIRD-PR to deliver her paper to her presentation, and afterward we'll discuss. We'll have questions, and then we'll have a response from her. So let's welcome her to her presentation. Ruchira Bhattacharya.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. As Dr. Uddin is very much right that we are trying to focus on two areas in today's presentation. First is SDG #2, which is we want to achieve zero hunger, and then also SDG #1, that's zero poverty, and there are intersections between the two. Now, when we talk about a sustainable development goal, we have come to the
Ma'am, accidentally your microphone is muted.
Yes, am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible now.
Thank you so much, Uday. Thank you. Just let me know, Urin, can I share my screen because I have a presentation?
Yes, you can share.
Okay, just give me one moment. Is the presentation visible?
It's visible. Yeah.
Yes.
You can see that.
So level issues, it's not just about hunger, it's not just about one single outcome of a certain development goal. There are intersections in place which kind of create the outcomes that we see, and it's very important to understand these intersections at micro level. It's very important to understand the culture in the first place to be able to create a policy which will create it, because policies may be developed by experts at the top level, but they need to be receptible and acceptable to the people who will be the ultimate beneficiaries. So with that in mind, what I'll present here today is you quantitative qualitative evidence that we have on intersections, and we I'll define as we go ahead with our presentation what I mean by intersections, and we will know that how we have defined gender. But to start with the background, that what juncture are we talking about nutrition? And I bring in the India story today because I practically work in the Indian context, and my primary focus is the secondary data sets that we have on nutrition in India and some primary studies that we do with the support of Government of India. So the context that we have in front of us today, and please do let me know if at any point of time you're not able to hear me, because my internet is a little bit sketchy and it might be a little unclear at times. So feel free to stop me and ask me to start. We are at a juncture where we have a very high proportion of malnourishment and hunger, especially among women and children of India. Now, we know that hunger is extremely high globally, but then we see that the problem of hunger malnourishment essentially is a very gendered problem. We see that NFHS 5, which is the DHS data in India, the National Family Health Survey, the latest one is 2019-21, and this is the last data that we have on any indicator related to nutrition. The other data sets that we have, they kind of stop at 2011, and then we don't have any recent data sets. So the NFHS 5, what it shows that every second woman in reproductive age in India, and nearly 2 in 3 children who are in 6 to 59 months age group, they had anemia, which means that hemoglobin levels were below 11 grams per deciliter. From 2015-16 to 2019-21, so this is NFHS 4 to 5, we saw that there was a mild decline in the chronic energy deficiency. So the average BMI increased a little bit, but this was supplanted by a notable increase in obesity in adult women. So slowly we have gained a double burden of malnutrition. So on the one hand, we have a huge chunk of women who are malnourished, who are anemic, who have low body weight. And on the same time, our country is seeing increase in women who have high body weight. And both of them are public health nightmare, and both of them have extreme repercussions on welfare of people, on quality of life, and on public health expenditure in general. In under 5 age group, we see that 1 in 3 children were suffering from stunting. That is, they were not getting the height that they should get as per their age. 1 in 5 children reported wasting, and every 10th child in India was suffering from acute malnourishment. And acute malnourishment, as you all know, it's fatal in nature. People can die because of acute malnourishment. So this is the situation of India's nutrition outcomes. Now, this is a paradox in the sense that India's average income over these years, that all the we see, average income for India has never gone down. So our GDP has grown fairly stably over the time period. Our political scenario has more or less been stable. We are not a country which has seen any major civil war or any major kind of shifts in borders or anything. We did not face a major famine after 1942. So in all sense, and we had a very strong food security policy in place in the name of public distribution system. Because income wise, GDP wise, food security policy wise, or socio-political environment that you see from a macro perspective, things look pretty much stable. So why do so many number of people, and especially people in rural India, they're not able to access nutrition, which is the basic minimum requirement for a proper quality of life? Now, I think we'll be able to get many of these answers if we look at it from a societal perspective, and especially we look at it from a gender perspective. So now when I'm talking about gender in this presentation, I'm not just talking about the differences between male body weight and female body weight. We are talking about it from a sociological perspective, that because of the kind of roles or the kind of expectations that get imposed on the biological females and the biological males, what kind of barriers get created in their way of achieving nutrition. So in that sense, we'll be looking at gender, and we will see that how different determinants of nutrition, as Dr. Mohammed was initially talking about, that there are multi-layered determinants of nutrition that works behind creating a malnutrition situation. So how in these determinants can be equally mapped to the access to nutrition and the gendered barrier to nutrition. Now, UNICEF has pretty much, so there are multiple frameworks that we can study for understanding determinants of nutrition, but I go by the UNICEF framework because it's globally accepted and it's pretty much robust in the sense that it has been studied in multiple countries, and we have come to this framework on which they define determinants of, they talk about child malnutrition, but it's fine, we can kind of extend it to the adult malnutrition discussion as well. So they talk about 3 layers of determinants. First is of course the immediate determinants, and there we have diets, care, and disease practices. So I just saw that in the recent 2020 UNICEF practices, the discussion on diets is kind of it's not there. They have removed the diets. I don't know why, but then care and diseases is there. So immediate is what immediately causes you to lose weight. So wasting is one of the direct output of immediate determinants of malnutrition. So there are care and diseases. So you see that there are evidence in each of these determinants that there is a gendered barrier. So we see that access to nutrition gets influenced by social groups, so through direct and systemic exclusion. We see that in terms of care, mother's BMI, short stature, and lack of antenatal care to the mother is linked to child's birth weight and BMI. So when there is not enough care for the mother and the mother's BMI is very low, we see that the child also tends to become low birth weight and low BMI. Also, there are the practices of consuming low protein, especially among the mainland South Asian. We tend to consume low protein. So in the same family that the male will have non-vegan food, etc., but the female members are not encouraged to consume the same. So intergenerational lower access to protein kind of leads to a problem of stunting in the population. Going to the next level, which is the underlying level of determinants. So underlying determinants kind of cause the immediate determinants to take place. They create the ecosystem where malnutrition kind of gets created. So underlying determinants are your food, practices, and services. Very broadly, we can divide by access to food, different kind of practices around food and consumption, and services that are available to improve nutrition. And we will be talking about services as well. The qualitative evidence will bring in that discussion as well in later stage. We see that in terms of the ecosystem, we have the differences in the health-seeking women, access to services, and higher self-esteem. So women who not have correct education, or women who have lower status and value in the society, we see that they do not go for health seeking. Even if they're sick, they'll tend to hide it, or they'll tend to go at the last level. Access to services is low because they're shy talking about their problems to the healthcare provider, and lack of self-esteem, which creates self-harming practices, in turn leads to lower consumption or not taking better care of their children. We see that education of mothers, secondary and higher at least, has a very high impact on child's undernutrition. Women's own nutritional knowledge has an impact on child's undernutrition. And these things have an impact on care practices for self and child. Moving on to the systematic difference between men's and women's lower access. So there are men's and women's comparison. If you do it across the LMICs, there is systematically lower access for women in employment, in land or other productive capital, in adequate wages, and in status as an equal member in despotic family structures. So all these ecosystems are created where women tend to access nutrition in a different way than, therefore the way gender interacts in this country creates an automatic barrier for women to access nutrition. Going to the enabling environments, we're talking about resources, norms, and governance. So you can see that all these determinants of nutrition can be some way mapped to the evidence that we have on what kind of creates malnutrition in the society. So we were talking about land or land or productive capital, and there are a lot of studies. I have referred 1 or 2 of them, but there are multiple studies. If anybody wants, we can provide the bibliography. So we see that land is a very important capital in creating the gendered difference between women and men's status of nutrition. How so? So it's a little dated study, it's a 2015 study, a World Food Policy, but then it shows the point, I mean, it makes the point very clearly. So what they have done is they have distributed the chronic hunger. So if you take chronic hunger as 100%, they have distributed it between genders. So in all the LMICs, if you distribute chronic hunger, 60% of chronically hungry, that they don't have a single full meal in probably the last 4 weeks. So 60% of them are women and 40% are men. So in chronically hungry people, we see that women has a higher share. But if you divide it among the countries and you take the agricultural South Asia, where culturally or whatever norm there is in the patriarchal society or patrilocality of women's habitation or marriages, properties get transferred from men to men. So in these agricultural South Asian countries where women don't have access to lands, in these countries, the chronically hungry percentage is extremely skewed. So 70% of women are chronically hungry. Out of the chronically hungry, 70% are women and only 30% are men. You go to agricultural sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, although have a problem of gender differences in resources, but they do not have this patrilocality or this transfer of land from men to women. So they saw the distribution or ownership of land in the sub-Saharan Africa is a little better, and the gender skewedness is a little less than the agricultural South Asia. And the chronically hungry percentage is also a little better. So they again have 60-40 ratio, which is similar to the global ratio. If we go to Western Asia, which is the landholder side, and this kind of women hold a lot of land in Western Asia, and the problem of South Asia that land is essentially in the name of men, or at least men control what happens to the land which is in the name of women, that problem is not there in Western Asia. And we see that the drop in chronically hungry in the women substantively. So it's just 5% of chronically hungry that are women and 95% are men. Similarly, in landholding sub-Saharan Africa, again, the problem is not similar to the agriculture. Just 15% of the population and 85% are men. So we see that there is a correlation at least between the way landholding is distributed between genders and the way chronic hunger is distributed between genders. So although I will not go as far as to make it a causality, but then there is a clear correlation between how women access resources and how hunger is distributed. So we need to think about the gender and hunger relationship here. Going to some other evidences, this is Asian Development Bank's evidence card, and I have just taken it the way it is because it's pretty self-explanatory. We see that 60% of undernourished globally are women and boys, and this is not just LMIC, they are talking about the global undernourishment. And gender equality, they are saying will make a substantive contribution to a country's economic growth. So it's a single most determinant of food security. And they're saying that if we can somehow equal the gender differences, it will make substantive contribution. Now, what are the evidence that they're showing? They're showing that agricultural gender gaps is very high in globally. Gender inequalities are there in access to rural resources, services, and labor market opportunities. There is also undervaluation of women's votes and contributions, and undervaluation has always been a problem in actually measuring women's contribution to the economy, as well as developing a policy only for women, because women are basically doing invisible work. So even if they're working in the land, or even if they're bringing in value to the agricultural system, that gets counted as domestic work and that does not get valued in a proper rate. So we cannot make a policy to invisible labor. So undervaluation of women's roles and contributions also make them invisible to the policy. There are also gender neutral policies. I will give you an example later on how gender neutral policies are bad for proper redistribution of resources, but there are policies which do not understand the systemic barriers that women face. So although they are not on the face, they are not creating any discrimination, but by being unable to see the gender distribution of resources or the systemic barriers, they are creating or at least continuing the undervaluation and the inequities that are already in place. And we also have an extreme lack of gender specific data. And this is somewhere I think institutions like CIRDAP and NIRD-PR, they have a huge role to play here. So at the micro level, we do not have data on gender specific indicators. We have indicators and their biological, like sex-wise disaggregation. We know that these many male farmers are here, these many women farmers are here, but we do not know what kind of systemic barriers goes on to stop women from entering a certain sector, to monetize their assets, to access different nutrition rates. So these are gendered data that we do not have, especially in the low and middle income country setting at a large scale. So very small scale studies here and there, but we do not have large scale data. There is also different policies. So this is Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations that estimates that closing the gender gap in access to productive resources meaning land, credit, machinery, or chemicals, could eliminate the yield gap of 20 to 30% among men and women. And if that happens, that we can eliminate the yield gap between men and women, that will increase domestic agricultural output by 2.5% to 4%, which means that 100 million fewer people will be living in hunger. So when I said that the goal of zero hunger is essentially linked to other SDG goals such as zero poverty as well as gender equality, this is because there are indirect impact of removing systemic barriers from place. Now, note that when we say that there are yield gap between men and women, some people tend to argue that it's because women are bad farmers. They're not, they don't have the generational knowledge of how to do farming, probably because that's why there is an yield gap. There is no systemic barrier. It's just a difference in capability. But remember that there are studies in low and middle income countries that show that take up action research that have taken experiments, and they have shown that there is no statistical difference between managerial efficiency of women and men farmers. So this is Agarwal's 2012 study. There are more studies on this. You can just find it out. Women farmers report lower yields and productivity due to different gender asymmetries. We will talk about the asymmetries a little later, but remember that this yield gap is not because of capability difference. Mostly they're probably partly because women don't have the generational knowledge, right? But then there is no inherent managerial deficiency in women, and between women and men farmers, there is no inherent difference in managerial efficiency. Moving on. Yeah. So sometimes when there is an external shock or when there is some kind of a crisis, these gendered vulnerabilities tend to manifest themselves very clearly. So in normal times, we may not be able to see gender differences or gender inequalities. We may not be able to, may not face it on a regular basis, and we are not able to identify them on a regular basis because they don't, they're subtle, they're invisible, and they're not directly visible to your naked eye. But then when there is an external shock, these gendered vulnerabilities tend to start to manifest itself. So one example is, of course, your post-COVID experience for rural women in India. So we saw that when lockdown happened, and it happened very quickly, within a couple of hours, we got to know that we cannot get out of the house and then nobody can move. Everyone has to stay where they are. And suddenly all the source seasonal work dried up everywhere. So whatever factory was open, it closed immediately. Whatever land was operating, the land operations closed. Rural, urban, all across the country, suddenly things stopped. Now what happened is the sudden work dried up, and this lockdown, the seasonal work drying up, juxtaposed with the agricultural lean season. So it was the month of this month, March, April. And this is the agricultural lean season. There is no new crop being sown right now. So the sowing season just starts and the cutting season is over. So it's the lean part of the period. So this is the time when rural households kind of tend to go to the urban areas in search of non-farm work. So that's how they take their agricultural lean seasons. Now, non-farm work completely stopped because of lockdown, and there is no farm work happening and there is no income. Now, the access to regular employment opportunities, which was already low for women, it further worsened with Anganwadis and schools being closed. So in India, rural women have a major source of employment in the Anganwadis, where they can teach, where they can take care of the child and get some cash in. This regular salary coming in, and even if it comes, it will come in a very long gap, after a long gap. So the regular cash flow kind of stopped. The independent sources of income of women also lower. And we suddenly saw that decades of gain in nutrition, health, education have started kind of tumbling down, and we saw a spurt of increase in child marriage suddenly in certain areas of the country. So parents will be desperate, they'll marry of their field, and there is absolutely no monitoring. So certain indicators, we saw that it started setting back to where we started from. There was also a recorded decline in household food consumption, high PDS demand, and extreme fall in dietary diversity, especially for women and girls in rural households. And we had reports coming in that women and girl child in rural households have had to forego certain meals to make sure that the men at least get some food, or they had to eat as something as simple as rice and salt just to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of food. So there were extreme gendered vulnerabilities created during the time of COVID, which kind of manifested in the later indicators of health and nutrition as well. Now, there are evidence all across the world that link women's empowerment to dietary intake. So when we talk about gendered vulnerabilities, gender intersections, the reason why I keep coming back to the gender identity of women, and I don't talk about the other identities as much, is because the scale is huge. At the scale at which women face the vulnerabilities, it's huge. They take up a huge proportion of your country's population. So their impact on the country's overall outcome will be huge. That's one reason. And the second reason is that the vulnerabilities are multidimensional and extreme. So there are evidences across the low and middle income countries of how women empowerment has an impact on dietary intake, diet being a basic and immediate factor of women empower or start taking decisions, nutritional outcome of the families tend to improve macronutrient intake of the families. So again, a dietary diversity basically that shows that manifests in macronutrient intake that tend to improve. Dietary diversity index tends to improve, and mitigation of dietary crisis from low production diversity tends to happen. So even you have a low production, but the women can take decisions, they can kind of mitigate the dietary crisis and distribute the low production, the little bit of what you have better. So there are these kinds of evidence that we have from all across the LMICs. Now there are different pathways that we have seen how it works when it comes to taking the women's power or empowerment. So the way women's empowerment is approached through policy in India and in Bangladesh is to bring women into collectives. So make women's collectives, create microfinance pathways. So we see that how does this pathway translate to empowerment and then nutrition. So there are different pathways. First is the income pathway. So women have access to savings, credit trainings, bank linkages. They can take loans, purchase assets, and increase household income, accumulate asset, and smooth their consumption in terms of shock. There is also agricultural pathway where there is natural resource management. Harvesting from common resources can happen. Agricultural planning, seeds and technologies. So women as a farmer becomes empowered. They can choose multiple crop variety, which is ecologically sensitive, which does not need much input, which is not risky. And they can also take some kind of diversified livelihood, such as poultry, livestock, fish rearing, all of which can lead to an agricultural pathway of better food production, balanced food production, and better sale of food, so some kind of income. There is also the health, nutrition, behavioral change pathway. So health and nutrition information that you deliver through these collective groups, they reach the communities much faster in a much more efficient and relatable way. So women, if they're brought into collectives and you deliver the nutrition which is relatable to them, their culture and their language, it tends to reach the communities in a much faster and much more effective and relatable way. So there is awareness and knowledge, social support, change in social norms, which ultimately leads to behavioral change of the women. And finally, there is a rights pathway. So social accountability training can be given through the collectives. There are evidence of that. And interactions with service providers can happen, demand generation can happen. So community starts to understand that the services are kind of required for their overall improvement. They demand better services. There is social audit in place and service quality kind of improves. So things that improve because of collectives, if you see the direction of the arrow, whatever is a upward arrow, it improves, downward arrow, it decreases. So resilience to shock, food access, food security, intake of diverse nutrient-rich food, nutrient absorption, seeking healthy and diverse food, and hygiene. These improve. Disease burden due to lack of hygiene and IYCF practices, disease burden decreases, and IYCF practices kind of improve. So the impact overall we see on health. So we see a healthy maternal BMI, improvement of micronutrient status, decline of anemia, child stunting, child underweight, child wasting, and improvement of newborn health. So there is a holistic improvement through women collective and women empowerment pathway. I was talking about the asymmetries earlier in one of the slides, and I told you that I'll talk about it a little later. So when we talk about asymmetries, again, we have to think about asymmetries from a multiple standpoint. So it's not just a family asymmetry that a woman in the family does not have enough access to decisions or does not have enough autonomy. That is there, but we have to understand that gender asymmetries take part in all layers of society, starting from the top. So there are asymmetries in access to and control over land, finance, social and physical assets. There is market asymmetry in participation and power in land, labor, finance, and product market. A very simple example from India, if you see that women's access to mandi. So if you are a woman farmer and you want to sell your product to mandi, it is nearly impossible for you to take your product, put it in a truck, go to a mandi, sit there all day and bargain with the buyers or the procurers to get a fair price. If you are a woman, you just go alone in a truck with your product, you will be ripped apart, you will be looted away. There is no place for a woman to even sit. It's not a dignified place for women. You will face a lot of harassment. So for a woman farmer to be a good farmer is not enough. There are other gender barriers for her to access the market. So market asymmetries are there, and the same happens in land market. She cannot buy land without the guidance from her male members in the family. She cannot take part in the labor market. Straight away, you cannot go and sell your labor. There is no such sector where you can sell your labor. If you sell it, you will not get fair price or fair wage. There is asymmetry in finance market, which I think our friends from Bangladesh will know very well. And then there are asymmetries in the state policies and programs. So extension training, social protection, there are asymmetries in these as well. Now, remember I was talking about the gender neutral policies in one of the slides. Now, what I meant by gender neutral can be understood by a small example of how state policies and programs can not understand gender barriers. So in India, we take a lot of pride in our cooperative programs, right? We have the cooperatives, we have the cooperatives, and these are huge cooperatives that have become multi-billion industries, and they are almost like MNCs now, corporate culture, etc., etc. But look at the way these cooperatives have worked in terms of the gendered space. So the Malkanur cooperative, for the longest time, to be a member of the cooperative, they did not create an immediate barrier to accessing the cooperative because you're a woman. No one is saying that because you're a woman farmer, you cannot join the cooperative. Fine, you are a woman, you're a farmer, you can join. But how do they define somebody as farmer? They define it by ownership of arable land. So they say that if you have a certain acre of arable land to your name, the land patta is in your name, you can come and join the Malkanur cooperative. Now in the society at that time, how many women will have access to land, or how many women will have the land patta in her name? And what kind of family will move over or the transfer the land patta to the woman's name just so that she can move out of the house now and join something outside the house and spend time outside the house? So this is how the cooperatives, even though they were not explicitly saying that we are excluding women, but by creating a condition which is kind of gender blind in a space, know that the condition itself is not accessed by many members of the society, they were gender neutral and that way gender blind to the process of women. So in a period of decades, there was a huge gender asymmetry. They have kind of created different mechanisms or created women cooperatives, created women only entry spaces for women to join and balance out the gender asymmetry. So the asymmetries can be in multiple pillars and work from home right up to state policies. Now, to summarize the gender challenges that we see from literature and some of the secondary sources, we have challenges, and it's a very generalistic summarization, layers to it when there is not enough time to discuss all those things. So there are challenges to women as producers. So women cannot access welfare net that requires ownership of land as inclusion criteria. Women do not get fair share of produce and earning because of multiple social barriers. Women are mostly overworked and burdened with housework and outdoor work. So devalued contributor, invisible to policy, limited bargaining power with state institutions and markets, creating an unequal entry for women in the non-domestic sphere. There are also challenges to women as humans and consumers. Women have lack of access to sufficient food, dietary diversity for cultural reasons or other reasons, circle of poverty and malnourishment. So we see that although men also are poor, there are multiple families that are poor, and men and women both face poverty. But if we take all the poor of the world as 100% and take the share of women out of it, we see that disproportionately it's women of this older age and adolescent girls as well. Malnourishment, similarly, women have disproportionately high rate of malnourishment. There is low access to land, farm decisions, lower share of produce or income, lower purchasing power, lower bargaining power. So bargain keeps coming up in both the places. So basically, because they don't have enough resources, they also don't have enough bargaining power. Now, to give some of the solutions, there are studies that have been done by many scholars. One of the solutions that I proposed that women, if they can be formed into cooperative groups, and they can pull up a little bit of land that they have through a pooling of labor and land, they can overcome certain gender barriers and place themselves in a financially better place. Agarwal also goes on to employ Nancy Fraser's framework in collective farming and empowerment. And she says the way that this collective farming works for women is through pathway. One is distribution, is through land pooling, inputs to fertilizer, technology, and seed, and through labor pooling. You can redistribute resources better and access resources. So if I don't have land, I can access your land. and I provide fertilizer, my labor and technology or whatever. There is also the pathway of recognition. So you get to work outside family, land or household domain, which means you can demand fair wage, and increased mobility, autonomy and bargaining power. So if you go out, start talking to other people, understand that there are other women who are at the same situation, you tend to start becoming more aware. And when you are more aware of the society, you start bargaining, you start understanding where your positions are. Also, knowledge sharing and increased experience about outdoors, that also tends to make you more empowered and take agency in your own hands. Representation, so collectivization builds leadership qualities. There are now multiple studies that have shown that women who have gone on to join collectives, they're also more likely to be politically successful later on. So in politics, local governance later on. The women are also more articulate in sharing issues and demanding solutions. And there is a greater chance of organized representation politically when you have a collective which is very powerful. So these are some of the secondary data sets or secondary information. And there is also policy change pathway. I will not go into it. It's Naila Kabir's pathway. So I just talked about the Malka Noor example. This is what it shows in a pictorial thinking, that from gender blind policies through rethinking assumptions and practices, we can come to gender aware policies through multiple channels. The gender aware policy can also be gender neutral, but you need to understand that where women are more vulnerable and bring your policy to impact those areas. Gender redistributive policies, that you directly change the gender norms, or gender specific policies that you take up the social issues which influence a certain gender. For example, if you work only on anemia, by default anemia affects women more, so you are working for women, so that way you can create gender aware policies. Now what I'll show is some of the secondary data sets that we have, and then I will go to the primary data evidence, our own study of NIRD-PR, and I'll present the results to you. Now, the biggest secondary data that we have on malnutrition in India is the National Family Health Survey, which is the NFHS 5. That's the latest data. And it's freely available. You can just go to the NFHS website. Every fact card, everything is available in a most readable format. You want to know the status of one state, you just click on the state, gives you the status. But to kind of bring it together, just to show you the overall status of what has happened over the last 15 years or so, we see that proportion of thin women aged 15 to 49. So they basically take data from women of reproductive age group. So that has declined from 23% in 2015-16 to 19% in 2019-20. So if you see this is BMI less than 18.5. That when I say thin or chronically energy deficient, I'll be using these words interchangeably throughout the presentation. So I'm basically talking about BMI, that is height to weight ratio, weight to height ratio, that is less than 18.5. Now you see the leftmost bars, this is women, and it was 35.5 in 2005 and 6, declined to 23% in 2015-16, and then finally to around 19% in 2019-20. So there is a reduction in thinness of women. But then if you see anemia, there is an increase. So we had 55% in 2005, but it has increased to 57%. For men, the reduction is, their starting point is where women were in the midway. So in 2005 itself, to 2015 was a little less than what women's decline was. So it was 21.2%, mainly because this 5 years also saw intensive ICDS activity. So we had integrated child development scheme and multiple schemes that were intensively working. So this decline is expected to be sharper. And we see that there is some decline for men as well. And then in 2019-21, that is the last data point we have, and it's also post-COVID data point, we see that men have 16.2% of BMI. So a little better than women still, but then the decline has been less than women because they're already at a lower level. For women, the anemia rates have increased over time. For men, the anemia rates, it's, compared to women, it's almost half. And similarly, in 38.8% declined to 21.2%, and anemia rates have remained more or less the same, that is nearly 60%. So every second woman you will meet in India will be an anemic woman. Now moving to another data set that we have, which is the Indian Human Development Survey data. And this is a panel data, so an extremely strong way to understand ethnographic outcomes, anthropometric outcomes. And by CED here, I mean chronically energy deficient. That is again BMI. So if BMI less than 18.5 means you are chronically energy deficient. So we see if we take the overall population, and they don't give data at subnational level. So this is for all India. So at overall population, we have distributed the status of BMI deficiency, or no CED means proper weight, normal weight, CED means thin weight. So you distributed the thin weight, the weight distribution of 2011 by 2005. So if you can read the quadrants here, so there are 4 quadrants that add up to 100%. And the top left quadrant here is the group of people who were normal, not thin in 2005, and they were not thin in 2011. So their status did not change, but they were in the not thin category. So nothing changed. The bottom quadrant are the ones who were chronically energy deficient in 2005, but after 5 years, we see that their health has improved. And this is the majority of the population. After 5 years, 65% of people have come out of thinness and they have become no CED. This is the problematic column where these are chronically energy deficient people. So this 2.8% in the top right corner, they were healthy people in 2005, and now they have become chronically energy deficient for multiple reasons. It can be this group of people. So this is the column where we're interested in. And if you now disaggregate this data, this 100% further by gender and caste, the picture kind of is very clear. We see that men, be it from general caste or be it from Dalit caste, which is again an extremely poor and they don't have access to land or resources that distribute by the caste. You see that in this quadrant where people change from healthy to not healthy, from normal weight to thin weight, men are almost inexistent in this quadrant. So 0.1%, 0.1%. General men whose situation stayed same, that they were thin earlier, they are thin now, it's almost 12%. For Dalit men, it's slightly higher at 17%. General women, on the other hand, you see a one figure percentage in the chronically energy deficient. So from healthy weight, they went to thin weight. So 5% in general women and 6.9%, almost 7% in Dalit women. So out of all these social groups, we see that intersection of the gender of women and caste seems to be the most disadvantageous for Dalit women here in terms of accessing nutrition that can make their weight properly or keep their weight. So they became thin over the time period. So these are some of the way you can understand how gender kind of intersects. Now moving on to our own study that we had done in NIRD-PR. So this is the report you can find in NIRD website. I'll not go into the detail of the study. This is the 2019 data. So before COVID, some things may have changed, but the overall story remains the same, that how things kind of intersect. So what we did is that we collected the V index, not the complete V index, but kind of an ad hoc V index to understand the distribution of dietary inadequacy or dietary diversity over the different ranks of empowerment. So to give you a context, I'll not go into detail, but we have seen that women's empowerment tends to improve nutritional security, child care, household nutritional status, increase the health-seeking behavior, access to services, and improve their self-esteem. But there is this approach of combining the metric of empowerment to nutrition outcomes. There are some limitations, because empirically it's very difficult to establish that how much empowerment creates how much nutrition. There is no way that you can establish that. The pathways are also very complicated, because we see that there are some empowered women as per the definition of empowerment in rural areas who are not as healthy as the women who are traditionally in your own definition unempowered. So why do these kinds of contradictions take place? Is because you don't read the social context or understand the social context to even define empowerment. So I think when we define empowerment, we should not have a one size fits all policy. There should be country specific, culture specific definitions of empowerment. So our research interest was to understand, was that there was an conclusive evidence to link empowerment scores, the V index as such, to indicators of nutrition universally. There was empowerment nutrition relation in full of contradiction that may improve nutritional status, but evidence also showed that women who are in livelihood or employment, they were suffering from chronic energy deficiency through an increase in time use burden or due to burden of productive and care work, so double burden. Thirdly, there was a need to look at the context specific relevance of the metric of empowerment. So there was also risk of inaccuracy in the binary quantification of the endogenous concept of empowerment with an exogenous definition. So there are multiple challenges which we want to take up. So our two very basic research questions: whether the nutrition empowerment link is better captured using a more contextualized V metric. So we created an ad hoc V index, and whether the biosocial attributes such as wealth and agroclimatic regions affect the complexity of nutrition empowerment empirical linkages. So with these questions, we created the tool for collecting the ad hoc V index. And then as an outcome indicator, we took the individual dietary diversity scores, 16 food items, and then less than 4 is what we define as dietary deficient. There was a, and then we understood that, then we tried to measure how the low IDDS, that is less than 4 score, is concentrated in the empowerment scale. So we created a concentration index, but not using the asset scores, but using empowerment scores as the underlying ranking variable. So we call it the modified Wagstaff concentration index, and we kind of saw how the IDDS deficiency is concentrated in that modified Wagstaff index. We call it ERCI for the rest of the study, and we further decomposed ERCI with different attributes to understand the pathway of this relationship better. Now, our study area, we took 4 states, and there is a whole logic of why we took up the study area. They conform to different agroclimatic regions of India, and there is also a different range in which women's empowerment related indicators kind of perform. So you can go to the report, see the details. Basically, we took up Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu. In each of the districts, we took one abundant and properly agricultural district and one dry district or bad agricultural district to kind of compare. These are also the districts that coincide with women's empowerment. So one district will be performing better in terms of women's well-being, the other will be performing worse, and within that we collected certain blocks and then randomized in collection of the villages and households. So once the villages were selected, of course, we went to dual households. So we used the local governance help to identify dual households where both men and women are into agriculture. So the V index, if you have very short overview of what the V index is. It's the multidimensional index combining adequacy in the 5 domains. So this is a robust index that has been tested in multiple countries by multiple groups, and they have come to the consensus of creating the adequacy in 5 domains. There is the production domain where they take input in production decisions, autonomy in production. There is the resource domain where they talk about, they take ownership of the assets, like who owns the assets, purchase, sale, or transfer of the assets. So who can decide and execute purchase, sale, or transfer of the assets. There is access to and decisions on credit. So these are the resource domain. Then there is the income domain, so control over use of income. There is leadership domain. So do you have a group membership or a collective membership, and can you speak in public comfortably? And then time domain. So do you have leisure where you can do self-development and take rest and kind of collect yourself, and what is your workload? So it's a supplementary question. So all these 10 indicators have equal weight in the V index, and then we calculate the gender parity from the combined index of the 10 indicators. Now, in our case, we contextualize the V index, and we did not change the 5 domains because they are robust and tested all across the world. And to change the 5 domains, we have to take a multi-country study and understand what domains work for us. We did not have that kind of a budget or capability or time. So we went to tweaking with purpose inside the domain, which was fairly agreeable because we could just take up the indicators and distribute the weight and kind of make it contextualized. So instead of asking the questions directly, we asked it in a way that the gender inequalities kind of get revealed. So we took operations within the agriculture, and for each operations, we asked who takes the decision and who actually executes the task. So operations, we took weeding of the crops before the sowing, then sowing, fertilizer, pesticide, harvesting, post-harvest work, and selling of the product. So in each of these operations, we saw how men and women participate. So we saw that men, in terms of weeding, for example, take decisions to take up the task. So when will weeding happen? Where will weeding happen? So all these decisions are taken by men. Similar on the sowing. So jointly with women, they decide which crop will be sown. Women and children basically perform the task. So it's women and children who are basically going to the field and doing the weeding. Men don't go to the field and start the weeding. Sowing, they jointly decide, but women are doing the sowing work. So the work is done by the women in our sample. Fertilizer and pesticide, men single-handedly decide the type of inputs, quantity, time of work, jointly performs the work with women. So what kind of input will be there? Women do not take part in it, men mostly take part in it. But doing the spreading the fertilizer, the pesticide, jointly men and women are doing it. Harvesting, deciding when to harvest, performing the task of harvesting, it's entirely up to men. Women have no primary role in the harvesting work in the sampled areas. Post-harvest work, men don't have any primary role. Once the crop is collected, women start on working on the crop, decide on the process through which the crop will be improved and be prepped for market or storage. Selling the product, men go to the market, men access the mandi, they decide the prices, they perform the task, no primary role in when the money comes in. So that's how the operations are divided between the genders, and we divide our B questions according to the operations, and then we aggregate. So we decide the sub indicators. I will not go into the entire detail. I'm losing time, so you can take the report and read it in great detail. We see that the attributes of sampled adults. So when I talk about the results here, I'm talking about my sampled adults. My sample size is roughly about 100, so I will not generalize it to an all India level, but whatever I say is true for my sampled population. So in the sampled adults, we see we fairly represent all adult age groups. So from 16 to above 61, there is 9% are 16 to 30 year of age. 31 to 45 years of age is around 35% to 36% of women, 46 to 60, 39, 40% of women, and then above 61, 15.1%. So in the rural villages of South, that Telangana and Tamil Nadu, the age group is a little on the higher side. The villages are a little older. In the northern villages, the villages are a little younger. That's what we had observed. In terms of education also, we see most, like almost half the women were illiterate, 41%. But for men were fairly a little bit of literacy was there. So these are agriculture. And certain seasons they do the agriculture, but they don't identify as farmers because they are not doing it time more than 6 months of the and women and as well here. So in obesity also and labor or the SC/ST category of population. Asset class, we see that mostly we have a medium asset class and then higher asset class. So these are asset classes, durable population. Yes, is there a comment? I'll move on then. The result of the percentage of adults with BMI less than 18.5. So we collected BMI data as well using our own instruments, etc. And we also collected RDS data. We don't use the BMI data in our main calculation because, of course, our instruments are not very advanced instruments. We took 3 readings and took an average across the readings, but it's not very safe to take it and make a conclusion out of it because this is ultimately our instruments which are not calibrated properly in every region, and we did not have the technical expertise also to calibrate it in a way that will be very scientific. But still, to have a reference of what kind of population we have dealt with, we give a reference to that. So we see that the percentage of adults with BMI in our population, the male percentage in Telangana was, this is the southern state, which is the dry and rice producing states, 21.3%, Tamil Nadu 11.6%, Madhya Pradesh 36%, Punjab 19.5%. Similarly, in female BMI, we see 19% in that we see adult or not empowered was higher for women than of men. So for men, it's just 2% difference from empowered to unempowered. But for women, it's a huge difference of more than 15%. And this is also statistically significant. Now our we go through it 7 on an average, and then highest patrilineal society, which is very highly technology advanced agriculture. So support that in advanced agricultural societies where it's very input driven, the land is pooled, machinery is used, women's values tend to become even lower. And we see the highest empowerment is in Tamil Nadu and Telangana, where women are still in traditional agrarian roles. They're taking part in the production process and therefore have higher decision making or higher say in the processes. Now to kind of look at the cross relation, we talked about the BMI scores or IDDS, how it links to empowerment. To kind of look at it in a pictorial way, we see that the BMI scores category. So with gender, again, there is an impact. So the normal body weight between men and women. So when there is gender parity in the household between the empowerment scores, we see that nearly 46%, 10.9 plus 35.6. So 46 or 47% of populations show that they are not properly weighted. So they're either underweight or overweight. Similarly, when there is no gender parity, this kind of increases a little bit more. So nearly 50% becomes underweight or overweight when there is no gender parity. For women, this is for women basically. For yeah, so and for no, this is for men. So for women, we see that when there is no gender parity, the distribution is almost similar to when there is gender parity. So when there is gender parity within the household, we see that even then the effect of unempowerment on BMI, that doesn't kind of show. So this empowerment score that we have, it does not show the kind of result we want with BMI results, but it shows an impact on the IDDS result, which we see in the earlier table as well. Similarly, with morbidity, we see that the no gender parity households have a slightly better outcome for women than the gender parity households. With household food insecurity, we see that no gender parity households have a slightly better outcome than the gender parity households. The details of this you'll find in the report. I'll not go into it, but there is an impact of gender parity on all the three indicators of health outcome except for the BMI scores category. Now we mapped the concentration of, as I was talking to you earlier, that we mapped the concentration of your malnutrition or IDDS inadequacy and the predictors of IDDS inadequacy by the underlying rank of empowerment. So we took a concentration index, used the empowerment as underlying rank and mapped it. So on an average, again, I'll not go to the exact detail, the light blue, the light green dots are basically for yeah, so this is for men, this is for women, and you see that there are deeper negative values for women than men, and most of the values for women are also statistically significant, not so much for the men. But then the overall result shows that the concentration of low IDDS by empowerment was negative for women. Higher concentration of low dietary diversity among disempowered individuals are varied sample. So that basically shows that when there is low, when the women are disempowered, that the empowerment scores are towards the lower side, that is the concentration of low dietary diversity is also observed. But if you break it down further, let me come back to it later on. Let me talk about the observations. So what you break, so we took 8 indicators across 5 domains. We saw that inadequate input in production, inability to speak in public, these were concentrated among the asset poor. Use it as underlying indicator like the original CI. Input in production and inability to speak in public are concentrated among the poor. And inadequacies in purchase of sale of assets, input in credit and savings, and time were actually concentrated among the rich. The asset. So you see that or gender inefficiencies or inadequacies perform or translate through the purchase and decisions, access to credit and savings decisions, and usage of time. So this is the way it manifests there. The gender barrier is created in production. So they take the input decision regarding. So in groups or meetings. Policy for different women, we have to understand this cross intersections as well. Men on the sample showed a statistically insignificant and close to zero ERCI, as I was talking to you earlier, that the ERCI of men is basically not statistically significant, whereas women showed statistically significant, negative, and higher ERCI. So more concentration on the unempowered side. So women showed a deeper concentration of IDDs inadequacies at the lower empowerment level than men for each socio-demographic attribute. So if we read the relationship between assets with empowerment and nutritional outcome, they indicate that lack of empowerment did not affect nutrition through poverty. Rather, there were complex pathways through which disempowered women found it harder to access better nutrition. So at different asset categories, there are different influence that play for women to not access nutrition. Coming back to the odds of women reporting IDDs less than 4, we saw that adjusting for gender, literacy, employment, welfare net, caste, and asset level, that the households which were without gender parity had highest odds of low individual level dietary diversity. So not having gender parity had an influence. They had twice more likely to be consuming less than required dietary diversity than the household which had gender parity linked. So the men and women had equal level of empowerment or unempowerment. So gender parity, remember, does not mean that both will be empowered. It might also mean that both men and women are unempowered for different reasons. So if they're both at the unempowered level or they're both at the empowered level, those households are less likely to say that they have low dietary diversity than the households where there is a gender imparity. So we see that women's status within the family relative to men is what decides how the household will perform in the dietary diversity sector. Moving on to the conclusion, I'll just summarize it. So women empowerment, I think, should be a key strategy for nutrition through long-term commitment to improving gender equality through all policy and development channels. But we need to rethink the high priority of economic or income generating policies for women's empowerment rather than prioritizing income generation as the only policy for empowerment. So there should be specific policies for specific inadequacies. Also, we need to deliberate on the modifying indicators of VR to make it more effective in capturing region specific differences. I just told you that it has a link with the asset categories of women. It performs differently in the high asset category than the low asset category, which also can be a manifestation of how geographies work. So richer states perform differently than the poorer states. So we need to have a geography specific view to understand the local context and scenarios better. So I'll end the quantitative evidence here. I'll quickly go through the qualitative evidence. This is again a paper under review, so I cannot go through the detail of the paper. So this is on the Dular ICDS strategy. You know that India had a long-running, largest nutrition scheme, supplementary nutrition scheme under the Integrated Child Development Services. UNICEF was supporting it for a long time. So in Bihar, UNICEF had into 2018, somewhere between the last decade, for nearly a decade, they had a Dular strategy added to the state's ICDS strategy, where they funded the formation of local level resource persons or second line workers to do close monitoring of the society. So we kind of studied 2 cases in Nagaon East of Saide Buzurg block and Rampur Nakar in Rajapakar block in Vaishali district of Bihar. And we saw that the activities of Dular were intensive in those district levels when they were active. So there were meetings of district coordination committees. So these coordination committees will create action plan, will monitor it, will see the impact and outcome. There were block level activities. There will be regular meetings for provision and interdepartmental coordination. And there will be complex level trainings for the development of village level volunteers. So extensive training at the village. These local resource persons, LRPs, were created and they were trained in village in their site to be able to perform. So there was intensive work going on, and the LRPs were instrumentalized to monitor 15 to 20 households closely, link between the households and the Anganwadi centers closely. And the strategy, which they call Dular strategy, there is no full form to it. It's just Dular, it means care. So the village contact drive was the primary strategy, where these local resource persons kind of do intensive work, such as drawing a map of the villages, marking the households. If there is a malnourished child in the households, they'll give a chalk mark to it and then closely visit and monitor the weight and the feed of the child, etc., etc. Now, when we compared because we went at the end of Dular phase, in 2008, government kind of took it up and then they diluted the local resource persons completely. So they stopped giving them the the basic honorarium for volunteer, and they said that if women want to continue as LRPs, we have no problem, but we will not give it recognition, we will not pay them the daily honorarium. Automatically, Dular kind of diluted, the strategy kind of diluted. So we went afterwards and we compared the current ICDS practices, which had a higher budgetary allocation, and the food was better and the infrastructure was better, but it did not have the higher manpower than earlier. So the human resource had kind of reduced from the earlier phases. And we compared the same mothers who had one child in the erstwhile Dular. So the older child may have gotten the feed when Dular was in place, and now she has a child who is attending the current ICDS. So we found out that those mothers who had at least 2 children, one in the erstwhile program and one in the current program. We interviewed those mothers, and we also interviewed women who were service delivery providers, service providers in erstwhile Dular as well as the current ICDS. And in certain thematic areas, we tried to understand where things have changed, which one is better, which one is worse. So the orange boxes are kind of the things which has gone wrong or which has gotten worse. And the blue boxes are where things are fine or things have gotten better. So in accessibility condition, we see that Dular was, so Dular was better. So accessing the program now is on the mothers. And in Dular, the monitoring was happening from the program. So now the mothers don't bring the child to the Anganwadi center, they access it. There is no cross monitoring from the Anganwadi center. There is not enough human resource. But in the earlier Dular exposed children, we see that this was intensively done. In quality of food improved in the current ICDS, but in the earlier period, the quality was not as much. And the IFA tablet was regular, but then that was because LRPs monitored the mothers, not because self-consumption. Knowledge in the current phase is much better because exclusive breastfeeding, we see that women know about it. Complementary feeding practices have improved in the society. In Dular period, things were still starting out and women could not recall that whether the practices were right or wrong at the period. Practices, we see that the current ICDS cannot recall much. There is no demonstration given. There is no village level training happening. And women, if they want to, even if they're service providers, they have to go to a block level training to attend that. So that's the journey of a day and they have to pay out of pocket. There is no traveling allowance given to them. So accessing knowledge or practice related information is a little difficult now. Outcome wise, of course, we did not collect outcome variable. This is FGD and focus group discussions, but they identified in all the centers that we studied that there is no severe... I'm sorry, is there an issue with the sound?
I think someone unmute the mic. Can you please mute the mic?
Yeah, is there an issue with the mic?
Yeah, Dr. Ruchira, yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Should I continue?
You continue, please. Please continue.
Right, thank you. So outcome wise, we see that, right, so the Dular exposed children, the mothers remembered that there were 3 children in the villages combined and they had seen visible improvement in their weight to height ratio through the intensive monitoring of the local resource persons. Now to map it into strengths and weaknesses in these areas in Dular, I think the strengths were a paid second line worker or local resource persons. Growth monitoring charts, which are insufficient ration for children's feed, was a weakness. Now, in quality related issues, full coverage of all the beneficiaries, because every 15 to 20 households had one local resource persons to monitor them, ensured that they get the feed. So quality issues were very high, but Dular did not have as much participation overall in terms of mothers in the ICDS. So the registration was not as high as the current ICDS. Knowledge wise, we saw that regular trainings with stipend to FLWs, trainings on convergence, but the weakness was finding constant engagement from the second line workers because they need to be paid, they need to be constantly trained, they dilute, then they have to bring them back. So that extra level of work was there. Work environment wise, women recall intensive participation and regular activities. So that is all we got from the women. ICDS, current ICDS, the strengths are, of course, ration and medicines have increased. There is more money flowing into the system, higher registration, but then they don't have at the time. So we went in 2018, so it's a bit dated. So at the time when we went to the field, there was no growth monitoring chart given to these women. So now they have corrected it. They have started giving it again, but the GMC was stopped for a good period of 6 to 8 months. So that's a long time for a child's lifeline. So a child just becomes almost 6 to 59 months, the window that you have, a child will cross that window. So no GMC was given for 6 to 8 months, which is a huge time. I think it should have been corrected earlier, but now they have corrected it. There was poor infrastructure. So even after so much of money, so Dular at least have this justification that there was not as much money coming in. But what justification can ICDS give you? It's a hugely funded program, but still we saw that infrastructure are poor. They're sharing premise with the panchayat house. They're sharing premise with the local health center. They don't have their own premises. So that's the weakness. Sanctioned vacancies were also not filled. So not only did they stop the payment to these local volunteers, resource persons, even the sanctioned vacancies of female frontline workers, or the women frontline workers, that is not filled over the time. So in terms of quality, we see that the current ICDS has had participation, but there is no monitoring of beneficiaries due to low human resource. That's a huge weakness. In terms of knowledge, we saw weakness because of mandatory block level trainings. Women are not ready to travel because they're dependent on their husbands or the male members to travel so far. They are not giving any traveling allowance, so they have to pay out of pocket to get a basic training. So that's a weakness in terms of knowledge. And work environment, they were obscure about the Gram Panchayat development plans. There was no recollection of any kind of strength in work environment. Instead of that, we got a lot of complaint on the weaknesses. So there were incoherences, the workload being too high, some beneficiaries complaining and confronting frequently regarding their benefits. There is no clarity in the community about the benefits and the roles of these women. So environment was also extremely stressful in the current ICDS system, mainly because of the human resource issues, but that was the observation. So we thought that to solve this, and if the governance need to kind of come in, that we are a Panchayati Raj institution, and if we talk about we are a convergence, where can we converge? Because we cannot start taking up health work and take the work from another mission, start doing it. We have to converge where our capabilities. So I thought that the convergence that kind of we see from this study coming out is a mid-course, is to stop a mid-course change. Because if you have a strategy going on like Dular, and suddenly in 2008, you take it up, you dilute the strategy. The change that started, or the wheel that started turning, it will stop suddenly, and that should not have happened. You bring the program to a closure, you continue the program to a closure, do an evaluation, decide whether you want to extend it or not. Suddenly taking it over and cutting it off was, I don't think, a good idea. So mid-course changes in strategy made it unfeasible for long-term monitoring and impact evaluation. So now we can only do qualitative studies like this, recall-based studies like this. That's been discontinued. So what impact will you evaluate? Unless a social coherence is established through a Panchayati Raj institution's continuous intervention, the nutrition interventions will continue to be plagued by social problems. So multiple incoherences, as I told you, social incoherence. So between beneficiaries and sevikas, there is incoherence. Intervention and beneficiaries, is a disconnect. So beneficiaries don't know exactly about the intervention. There is a social group-wise incoherence. So inter-household conflict is there. So if households from lower caste and lower strata are prioritized in supplementary feed, which is supposed to happen, the upper caste households are creating a problem, and they're threatening, and they're not letting the program run smoothly. There is governance and service delivery agents incoherence. So there is no space for these village women to demand infrastructure, human resource, or even better food and cleanliness, overburdened with multiple tasks. So multiple incoherences are there where Panchayati Raj can intervene, create the social ecosystem where the program can thrive, and the women can have their burden shared by others of the society. There is also a continuous requirement to update the beneficiary roster, and this is where Panchayati Raj can really come in. So beneficiaries keep changing, people migrate, people die, people change their places all the time. Women get married and go out, or women get married, come in. So immediately the roster changing is needed, which is not happening as regularly as required. So if possible, every month the roster needs to change, the list needs to go to the district, ration needs to be regulated accordingly. And also there should be a strategy for migrating mothers. So mostly we saw that women who lost out on Dular or lost out on the supplementary feed was because they were migrating at the time, not permanently, but if they are married women, they have gone to their mother's place for a certain period of time, they have lost out on the ICDS benefits. So this should not have happened. The common card should be there that they can access all these things in any areas they want. So this is where I think Panchayati Raj can come in. So to kind of bring it all to closure, so how do we inform the nutrition policy with gender?
So they can get some feedback from the participants.
Yes.
Okay.
So some possible way forward, I think, are to take empowerment as a key capital for nutrition, overhauling the community development, and rethinking a way to create an indicator which captures local realities, and then a long-term commitment to improve gender equality. So this is where I'll stop, and of course, I'm happy to take feedbacks from participants. Thank you.
Did I stop you abruptly?
No, thank you, no issues. Please go.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good presentation and very elaborated, and there are many components of, like, as you said, like empowerment and how it links with, like, data diversity score, and also like overall like nutrition outcomes. So and also like you are providing data from secondary sources, and also you have like some evidence from primary survey also. So it's a very good one, and I think like there are many conclusions that we can involve for our policy.
I'm sorry, I think my connection got a little disturbed in the.
You're okay. Do you hear me?
Yes, now I
Yeah.
can.
Okay. So there is no question. Of course, there will be a question. I know that Vinay Goswami, Dr. Goswami, are you there? I expect intervention from you.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
I'm sure that you might have some. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, this is indeed a very elaborate presentation. In fact, I would say that there are more content for one presentation, particularly in the last part. Probably could have been itself another presentation. Yeah, so there are some specific questions, but I won't get into those specific questions. But there's a larger issue. The issue is, you see, you have taken the household decisions that relates to agricultural operations to arrive at that, measure the gender parity or empowerment, or whether, a man or women are empowered or not. Now, so that itself, the kind of activities that you have chosen to measure the empowerment or lack of that, or gender parity or lack of that, that itself, if you change, your results might change, right? If you think of agriculture, now in India, the agricultural operation, even though we see over a period of time, the proportion of female workers is increasing, but the agricultural operation as such has remained male dominated, but very patriarchal, in the sense that I'll give you just two examples. One, if you think of the adoption of technology in agriculture, you will see that technology has been adopted particularly in those activities which have historically been performed by the male, so that probably you can release male labor to be utilized in the non-farm sector or other activities. But women are working in those areas where you don't see the adoption of technology. That is one. Secondly, about the decisions, like when to use fertilizer, what kind of fertilizers, whether to take credit or not, all those things, because it will be easier for a man to access the credit from a formal source or even from an informal source. Or even if you think of about this fertilizer, decision regarding the application of fertilizers, if you think of the agricultural extension services in India, and this is from my own work that I found, looking at the extension, both secondary and the primary data, we found that it's not gender sensitive. It's for a male farmer, it is easier to access extension services, right? So if you change that agricultural operation to something else in the household, say for example, the decision to sort of whether to, how long women or a mother would like to breastfeed the baby, or that kind of family planning, and so on and so forth. Gender parity or the empowerment index might actually change. So there is one thing that I wanted to comment. So then how do you link that to the nutrition indices, right? Based on those kind of the change, those numbers, those indices. That is number one. And the second question is, you see, again, the household decision with respect to agricultural operation. Now, you have taken decisions, the considered decisions that are taken at the household level. But, you know, in household on its own, though it is taken at the household level, the households are also, you know, subject to societal pressure, like where you are located, what kind of decision that you are taking. These are all influenced by the social norm. Like, for example, you will see a difference. In fact, in those, your scores were actually also showing that in Punjab, the scores are much lower compared to in Telangana. Probably if you take Kerala or Meghalaya, a matrilineal society, where women do have says in household level decisions, things could be different. So the point which I'm trying to make is that, you know, the household, though they take decisions at the household level, those decisions on the other hand are influenced by the gender norms or the societal pressures. So how do we then, of course, I mean, you have a limited objective of looking at the relation between gender parity and this nutrition outcome and so on and so forth. But leaving it only to the household level and not looking at how these household decisions are being taken under the society's, accepted norm or societal pressure, probably not give you the entire story. So these are the two comments that I would like to give. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the presenter mentioned about the asymmetry in terms of access to.
I would like to address the comments if. Yeah. So first of all, Dr. Goswami, it's a very good observation, and you have brought in the questions pretty well. But I think some of the questions that you have placed is because I could not explain the methodology of my study very clearly. So that is, I take that upon myself. I did not have enough time. Also, I tried to scrunch too many things into one presentation. But then if you see the study's methodology clearly, we are talking about a very specific index, which is women empowerment in agriculture. So V index is an established index by IFPRI, and they have published the indices, and we went by an established index instead of creating an entirely new index, because creating an entirely new index will require a country study. Creating an entirely new index will require a robustness analysis and sensitivity analysis, which will require multi-country sample and will require us to collect a lot more data than we possibly could. So we went with an established index, which has been studied in multiple countries all across the LMICs, and they have established the sensitivity analysis and established that the indicators and the domains that they have selected are fairly representative of the societal situation of the women. So indicators or taking an index is simply because of this reason, that the index represents the social situation of the scenario. So when we say that women's decision in agriculture, we are saying that the decision kind of represents the other situations within the society or within the overall ecosystem of gendered space that we have in the country. So from that context, we have taken this index instead of creating an entirely new index. Now, your observation is extremely right, that because it's a selective index of a certain sector, that women's decision in agriculture, it relates very well to certain index of nutrition, such as dietary diversity score or probably children's nutritional outcome. But it does not relate to certain other indicators of nutrition, such as BMI or body weight of women, or women's nutritional outcomes, or anemia, for example. So these asymmetries happen simply because what you have correctly observed, because it's a selective index of a certain sector. So let me clarify that with our objective we went because we did not want to create a new index. We wanted to see how women's decision making within agricultural system has an impact on certain indicators of nutrition. Now, of course, we need to have a better scope of the indices, which also our study concludes that these indices are to an extent unable to capture the local realities of gender. For example, the differences between the patrilocal societies with highly technological, here I don't actually agree with you. The evidence that you have presented, the adoption of technology, for example, because there are multiple studies, including a study by Azim Premji recently, and there are other studies there which kind of, give me 1 second. I'm in a meeting, I'll call you back. So there are multiple studies, for example, which show that the technology has entered into sectors where women traditionally worked. So the smaller manual menial labors which women could do in a society, that has been taken up by this pooling of land and bringing in these high production, high input systems. So locality of the society or patriarchal nature of the households kind of correlate very well with the societies which are doing high technology agriculture. So Punjab, for example, women's role in agriculture is very limited. So women's decision making is also very limited. But in Telangana, where the technology is at a very nascent level, women are still taking part in agriculture. They are also making the decisions. So there, I don't agree with your evidence basically. But then you are correct that the index is a limited one. It takes one sector into account and sees how women make decisions in that sector. With feminization agriculture, also there are different kind of evidences.
Sorry for interruption. Just because you said that about this adoption of technology and the gender, if you can explain that point a bit more. I mean, so what I meant basically, like you see, transplanting is something which is predominantly, again, it might vary. I mean, my knowledge is limited to certain states in India only. Of course, I don't know about Telangana. So I may be, therefore, you may correct me. Transplantation is something which is in paddy cultivation, which is predominant or probably harvesting also certain crops are done by women, but we don't see in certain states, at least, for example, in Assam and all those kind of states.
I completely agree. There is a geographical variation, there is a crop wise variation, there is agroclimatic variation. So being from low and middle income countries, we are both scholars from low and middle income countries, we have to acknowledge that the variations are there. But if we want to create a generalistic picture out of the variations and come to some policy conclusion, because there is a level where we have to generalize, we see that generalistically, if you take up the entire scenario, try to create a general picture, technology has entered the states and displaced women laborers predominantly. So they have not displaced male laborers as much as they have displaced women laborers, simply because the kind of tasks that women used to perform, they have been easily replaced by the machines, and women are now sitting at home and they are not taking part in technological part. So this is what we see after Green Revolution. That Green Revolution came in India. High-tech varieties of seeds came in. They have a different kind of input requirement. They have a different kind of machinery requirement. And then who come out of agriculture is the women laborers who come out of agriculture. So if you look at agriculture from a historical perspective, not just in one point of time in operational perspective.
How do we reconcile this point then that over time now we see actually the female workforce in agriculture is actually increasing?
There are female agricultural labor force has not increased in agriculture in all the operations. We see that in the certain crisis years when male labor has come back, female agricultural laborer have also gone out. If you see the census data, at least in India, you see that women's participation in agriculture has increased as casual laborers, not as farmers. So women farmers have actually gone down over time. So if you have to, participation in agriculture is not, it's a very general term. Participation is what? As farmers, decision makers, sellers, producers, or as casual laborers. So as casual laborers, yes, women have increased over time, but their participation is increased in a distressed situation. They are now casual laborers. It's not increased as a farmer, as a decision maker.
You two can have over email.
Right. No, I would like to address the other question also, because I think it's an important question. So Dr. Goswami talked about decisions at households and of course subject to societal pressure. But I think our study has a range of these confounding factors that we have controlled. And the confounding factors has all the societal attributes that we have controlled for. Of course, it needs more study and more kind of care to kind of present it. Again, it's my fault I could not present the whole methodology here. But to adjust for the societal or the socio-demographic situation, we have a series of attributes that we have controlled before coming to the conclusions. Decisions we have, VIA is not a household decision indicator. VIA kind of disaggregates between dual member households, asks the question separately to the members of the households, then aggregates it from the men and the women and then adds it together. So it's not exactly a household decision and it has other confounding factors before coming to the results. So that would be my 2 points. But of course, I agree that we can have more discussions on this.
Any intervention from Bangladesh Academy of Rural Development, BARD? Any intervention from there? Yes, Saifun Nahar. Go ahead.
Good morning. Dr. Khalaludin,
Miss Saif.
can I?
I'll come back to you. Yeah. Secretary Agriculture, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Let us hear Pakistan first. Okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, Dr. Ruchira, for making a nice presentation covering all the areas of malnourishment, which leading to anemia, obesity, and stunted growth. And then you rightly mentioned about the ecosystem, which include education, diet, and then the restrictions which you mentioned, like COVID episode. So you focused on agriculture sector, but I'm wondering that in most of the rural areas, the people are also relying on livestock and poultry because it plays a very important role in the economy as well as in the nutritional aspects of the households. And then you know that we are getting milk and milk products, and then fruits and vegetable, wherein we can go for its processing and value addition, and it can lead to the addressing the nutritional aspects as well as the economic factors of the household. So what's your intake of viewers on these points? Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the question, sir.
Dr. Bhattacharya, just wait. I'll have a couple more and then I'll give you just one. Okay. Yeah, and Saifun Nawar from Kumilabad. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I want to congratulate our today's presenter, Ms. Ruchira Bhattacharya, for her excellent presentation that identifying the gender nutrition intersections in India. And if we say about tell about Bangladesh, especially in rural area that I worked in a project, Women's Education Health Nutrition Improvement Project, we found that nowadays they are sensitizing about nutrition improvement, especially not only the general women, especially the pregnant women. They are caring, even in our government have some special program on that, and there are community clinic for 6,000 community clinic in our country in root level area. So women are getting from some advice from that area, but still now it is not that the it's not that there is no knowledge about food. Special barrier is to knowledge about nutrition, that which food we need, because we think that always the food which are expensive that are nutritious, but it's not. Even in our surroundings, especially in rural area, we found many nutritious food, but now there is improving. Nowadays it's improving, but still there are many lack. So government is also taking various projects in health related and nutrition related. This fourth phase is going on from our government, Bangladesh government. But I found that the presentation was very excellent presentation, and it is very much informative. I think we can do such kind of research in our country also, that we can find the main barrier or the real picture. So thank you, sir, for giving me the chance. And Ms. Ruchira Bhattacharya, thank you again for your presentation and research. Thank you.
Before that, I had a minor small question. That is like if we try to like regress like IDD, diversity score, like if we want to find determining factors of IDD, so there is something like we call like if a household in agriculture is diversified in terms of production, their dietary score is higher, something like that. There is a study. Another thing is like some other studies are saying, and I am one of the proponents of that also, that if we have enough income, like say we are receiving remittance from outside of India, Bangladesh. If I have income, enough income, educated income, and I have access to market, then I can diversify my diet. That's fine. Now the question is like when you see higher IDD, is it from higher income due to that, like receiving higher remittance from outside, or is it because of like diversification in the agriculture? So it can be income effect or their production practices. So when we're comparing across households, I mean, I didn't see like all the results. So I'm saying whether you have taken care of it. Thank you. You can answer.
I'll start with your question first, and then I'll go back to Sir's question on the livestock. So yes, when we did the dietary diversity score, we derived the adjusted logistic, the odds ratios. We controlled for income of the households and a range of other socio-demographic determinants. And you are right, in different asset categories, we see that dietary diversity scores relation with other indicators keep changing. So in a higher asset category, where households have certain level of income, and which means they have accumulated asset and they have savings as well. In those households, dietary diversity responds more to women's decision-making power. So even if you pull in more money for those households, it will not translate to dietary diversity simply because they have more money. Then comes the question of women's decision in the process of procuring and producing the food and distributing the food. So in those households, and we are talking about agrarian families only because we don't want to go to non-agrarian families, that creates a whole new set of control.
Is it stuck from my side, Rain?
No, sir, it's from her side, I think.
Okay.
I think Dr. Ruchira is disconnected, sir.
I'm sure she'll come back.
Okay, sir.
Just wait.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Okay. You're disconnected now. Yeah.
I got cut. I'm sorry, my internet is a bit sketchy.
You were answering. Yeah, you were answering.
Dietary diversity has the way dietary diversity links to empowerment has its different format in different sets of assets. So when the household is a richer household, we see that through empowerment, women can take decisions on what kind of diets will be procured. So even the richer.
So you net out income effect. That's fine. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm saying that this is a very important question for the LMICs actually, because what will our food policies be? Should we just give cash to people, give more income for their diet to improve, for nutrition to improve, or should we ensure that we have a healthy, nutritious ecosystem in place where people can access different nutritive items? And there is a study by NITI Aayog in India. It was not NITI Aayog then, it was Planning Commission then. So Planning Commission in India did a study long time back where they showed that if household income increases by a certain unit, and you see how that income is distributed between different item heads or different non-food and food share, the propensity to consume does not change by giving extra income. So if I and you have extra 100 rupees and our propensity to consume is that 80% will go in non-food and 20% will go in food, by getting 200 rupees, that share will not change. I'll still spend 80% in non-food and 20% in food, only that by that extra 20% being more than what it was, our food consumption might increase. So propensity to consume remains the same and cash inflow does not change it. What changes the propensity to consume? It's what ma'am was saying earlier, that you give the right knowledge to right people and decision-making power, the household dynamic kind of changes. The ecosystem is prepared and then you can inflow the cash. So it's not one or the other really, it's both together. It's always both together. The problem is a holistic problem and we have to see it holistically, which brings me to the question of our sir from Pakistan. Part of the index, I could not go into the detail. The index has questions on livestock operation, but I'll not go into it. But I think livestock is that income. So why agrarian communities, even after gaining agrarian income, are not able to translate it to proper nutritious diversity? I think it's because they are going for a particular kind of agriculture which is not giving them access to better nutrition. So what we had traditionally is what was best for us. But when we went for higher income, we brought in Green Revolution, high variety seeds. We went away from the traditional agriculture. We kind of imbalance the balance of this nutrition we had. So now our land needs more input, our people need more kind of machineries, so the money invested in agriculture is more, the income does not come as much, and which kind of creates
just one, you will answer other questions. Just I was wondering, like you mentioned, like asymmetry in terms of access to resources, right? Different types. So also you are defining, like you're constructing empowerment index, right?
in agriculture.
So yeah, it could in agriculture. It could could it be like, say, consider something like that lack of access is having some impact on score, dietary diversity score. At the same time, it is also having impact on your empowerment index, and that these two can
Yes,
each other.
assets can be a confounding factor. I understand what you are saying, but then what we do with the asset score is that we take it as a control variable when we kind of measure the concentration index. So when we measure the concentration index and we kind of do the disaggregation, or the we see the contribution of different components of the empowerment into the concentration index, we have to go for a logistic and control variable. So we take an asset at that point to ensure that at different asset categories, we can see the differences. So it is from that result where I'm saying that the empowerment nutrition relation changes in different categories of asset. So at some asset categories, empowerment is important. In some asset categories, it is not important for nutrition. So their asset itself becomes important. So poorer women will get more nutrition by having more income, true, but richer women giving them more income will not ensure that they get better nutrition. There we need them into the decision-making process more for ensure they have better nutrition. So that's overall, I think, what I'll say from my side.
Yeah,
of course, it's a limited sample, limited sector. There will be more complication of the story, but this is what I have to say.
From our IRD expert from Pakistan, he had one question. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was just, I agreed, and your question relates to his question really. I was saying that livestock is kind of the missing link between agriculture and nutrition disconnect. So if you have the traditional system of agriculture and you kind of continued with it without going for this high input, income oriented, highly technological Western agriculture that kind of came in India at a certain point of time, I think we could have gone into a path of nutrition security. But to kind of achieve the path of food security, that we needed enough grains in our storage, we kind of deviated from the path of nutrition security, which the smaller agrarian communities have maintained for so long. So if we have a balance of livestock access in the families and the households, this protein deficiency that has ingrained so much in the Indian communities, which kind of manifests in intergenerational stunting and wasting in children, that I think will go down. So yes, livestock is important and it will continue to be important for Indian farmers, but I don't know whether policy will see it anytime soon or will change accordingly anytime soon. So that would be my input to this.
Yeah, any more intervention? We are 30-40 minutes beyond our time, but still, since it's a very interesting topic and interesting presentation, I'm just going beyond. Any more intervention? And also, like, you can like have your feedback and send it to us or to Dr. Ruchira Bhattacharya if you want to.
I think as a group of CIRDAP, we should take up studies on this and understand the local realities more. I think it will be really interesting for us to do cross-country studies and use the platform to understand the world realities more. So if someone wants to pick it up, I would be very happy to collaborate and take part in it.
It's kind of like close this open discussion here, and I'll give it back to Hurin Janna. And before that, yes.
Sorry, sir, for an interruption. Sir, I have a question. Can we get the presentation? The presentation.
Yeah. So you are asking for presentation?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, I'll share it.
Sure. Yeah, actually, for all of our webinar, we have presentations. So yeah, if you need, you can. And also, as she mentioned several times, the paper also. Yeah. It's better. Ruchira, you are giving us the paper?
Yes, so the report is available online. I will share the report and the presentation. The paper is still under review, so I cannot share it at the current stage, but there is a preprint that I can share. So please do not refer it anywhere. That's my request.
Okay.
You
Okay,
can share
so yeah.
with CIRDAP Secretariat, we can share with all of us, all of you.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Dr. Bhattacharya, and this is a very eye-opening and also like refreshing for us. And we can borrow for our policy formulations from here. And I also like want to thank you all who participated here and also made insightful interventions. So we look forward to your participation in future. So with a big clap, I'm giving it to Puranjanna.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ruchira Bhattacharya, for your wonderful presentation. Now, this is the end of the webinar. So thank you so much. Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you.